Today on the Railway Room, it's Phase 1 Part 2 of my new build 009 model railway. Hello friends and welcome to the Railway Room. So today it's Part 2 of Phase 1 of my new 009 model railway. So first of all, apologies that this Part 2 has been such a long time in coming. Things have been a little bit hectic. At one point we really thought we were going to be moving house, and so I put on hold the build process and the layout for probably about 4 months. So it's taken a while to get to a stage where I'm ready to upload a new video in the construction. However, I am there now, and so this video we're going to be looking at adding point rodding, ballasting, I'm putting the station fencing down and then adding the platforms. So without any further introduction, wasting time from me, let's get cracking. Cool, so the next thing to do is I'm going to try and put some point rodding down, which is something I never bothered with on the first layout, so this is a little bit of a leap into the unknown. It's not something I have any great expertise on. What I've picked up is one of these Will's point rodding kits, so I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to come up with something that looks vaguely plausible using this. It's probably not going to be completely accurate, but as long as there's a reasonable representation, then hopefully I'm going to be pretty happy with it. So let's have a little look. I haven't opened this up yet. Let's see what goodies. There's lots and lots of little bits. Okay, so I've got some instructions and stuff on the inside there. And there's 4 different types of sprues. The first one, I've got 4 of these, and these are essentially just, if you can see in there, the basic point rodding itself, the actual rods that run the distance. And we've got 2 of each of the other ones. And so there's those, and then there's... Right, so let's have a look. So the rodding is these, and we just, to extend the run, we just glue these end to end, and if we have multiple ones together, they go side by side. So you can just glue them together, glue with poly cement's going to be best for the plastic kits. So that's fairly straightforward. Now there's the downset drive joints. So that's these ones. And there's 3 different heights because the cranks come in 3 different heights. So you have to obviously use a compensation for depending on what height crank you're going to be attaching these to. And so these are the cranks. So I can see on this end I've got the low bases, medium bases and the tall bases, which will correspond to which of the drive joints you're using. And then there's 3 different types of cranks as well. Oh my. The curved ones fit onto the lower bases, and the straight fit onto the tallest one. Okay, so there's adjustable cranks which go at the end next to the point, so that the amount of the throw can be adjusted. Obviously this is purely a static kit, so that's just for show, but it's a nice detail. So the compensators, this one is the compensator, and that's for long runs of rodding, to allow for the expansion and contraction according to temperature. And we've got on here a facing point lock. Now these kits are obviously designed for 00, so this is designed to fit in between the track. Now obviously we're on narrow gauge here, we're only 9mm gauge, so these may very well not fit in between the points, and I think quite often on narrow gauge they don't fit between the points, but they will actually be to the side of the points, the locks. So I'll need to have a think about how, if at all, I represent the point locks. So I think the first thing I'm going to do, now I've kind of worked out roughly what all the pieces are, is to work out exactly where my box is going to go, which is going to be roughly here, and then how the rodding is going to fit where I'm going to have to feed it underneath the track and all of that jazz, really. And so yeah, I'm going to do some planning. Cool. So the good news is the point rodding is all down, done and in place. The bad news is that it was very stressful and time consuming. There was much blue language, I would say, trying to get all this in, to the point where if and when I come to build a second station for the layout, I don't know whether I will be putting myself through it, putting the rodding in again. But I'm glad it's in. I think it's going to add a little bit of extra something. So there wasn't quite enough rodding in the kit to get right down to this far point. So I've cheated it a little bit. Hopefully it's not going to be too noticeable once it's all painted up, the platform's in. I've just expanded it out with some white plastic card there. So these supports are really a bit too far apart. I might leave it as it is. I might make up some vague representations of extra bits. To be honest, I'll see what it goes like once I've got some ballast down and make up my mind then. Now, to be honest, I'm far from convinced that the point rodding that I've got in is accurate to prototype, but it's relatively close. It gives a flavour, a bit of a representation of it, if nothing else. I think it does add to the scene. One thing I will note is I've not really put any of the facing point locks in, which really, per prototype, there should be. But one of the things is obviously the pico points that I've got here are not accurate to the prototype either. There are little bits in between on the tie rods that maybe could be said to be the point lock, but I have only used one set of rodding per point. That's quite deliberate, partly because it's so much of a stress and a headache getting this stuff in that doing twice as much was just not appealing. So I've worked on the principle that these are points using economical point locks, where the point lock and the point blades themselves are going to be operated by a single lever and a single rod rather than having two. So I have thought about it, and that's my explanation. That's what's going on there. So the next thing I want to think about now that I've got the point rodding down is to get a bit of ballasting done and get some ground cover in, and that'll really start to elevate the look of the layout, so that it's not just a bit of track on some board, which is what it is at the moment. Now, in order to do that, I really need to work out where the platforms are going to be, and also the footprints of the major buildings, particularly around the yard area. Now, I was going to reuse the Will's signal cabin, the small one that I had on Ddraig V. I decided ultimately it was really a bit too small for the amount of points and signals that it's controlling. So I've done away with that one for now, and I'm building a new signal box. For that I'm using the quite elderly Ratio 503 ground level signal box kit. It's an old kit now, but it still looks good. I hope it will when it's finished. So for now I've only built up the base part of it and the steps, but that will give me the footprint so that I can see whereabouts that's going to be, and then I can put the ballast and the ground cover around. So one thing is, because I've not used the facing point locks from the point rodding kit, I've been able to use the covers that comes with it just to go over the point rods where they come into the box. So a bit of a planking there. So they're going to go like that, and then the box is going to sit just about here. So I am planning to reuse the engine shed that I scratch built for Ddraig, but adding a bunch of extra details because it was quite basic. So I can use that for the footprint. At the moment I'm not 100% decided exactly what the surface of the platform is going to be constructed from. But I'm just going to put in the edges, the fronting of the platforms. And so for that I'm using some of these. And these are strips that I've cut of Will's plastic sheeting. I believe this one is a dressed stone wall. These are actually the strips of the front of the platform that I used on my last layout, Ddraig. But on that layout the platforms were a bit too high really. Not as high as a standard gauge platform, but enough to cause some overhang issues with some of the rolling stock. So I've actually cut these in half, so they're going to be about half the height of the platforms on that layout, and it's just a little bit above rail height, which is pretty reasonable I think from looking at all the pictures and videos and things and looking at various prototypes. Alright, so that's 3 lengths of these all poly-cemented together. So I'll just stand over it. Obviously a little bit wobbly, it's not very straight, so I'm going to have to be careful gluing it down. I'm probably going to glue it in sections rather than all in one go, just to make sure it's nice and straight. And what I'll do is I'll just run some PVA along the back of that to get it into position and hold it down when I do one section and then move along to the next and work my way around the platform like that. And the other thing that I need to do as I'm putting these in is I've got here a selection of my biggest, widest and lowest rolling stock. So I just need to check the clearances, make sure that they all run. This coach actually, it doesn't look like it's going to be much of a problem, but there's these footboards on here that really were getting caught on the platforms on my last layout. And the good news is, if I can get it on the rails, there we go, the footboards are now just above the height of this lowered platform. So that shouldn't cause any more problems, that's good. And then obviously, got the Rheilffordd loco, which is very wide, so I'm going to have to check that. And it is overhanging the platforms if I have the platforms there, but the height of this is actually below the bottom of the footplate, so it's not going to be too much of a problem in terms of the width. You just need to make sure you don't stand right next to the edge of the platform if this one's coming in. So there we have it, they're all in, and just run the glue down the inside, so I just need to wait for that to dry. And I'm going to move on to the next phase, whatever that is going to be. So in terms of doing the ballasting, I haven't got this the main line in yet because that's going to go onto a second board, so I'm going to fix that track down once I've got the other board ready and in position to go. So I'm only going to do ballasting up to this point and to a similar point on the shed line as well, because I'm not really going to be ballasting inside the shed itself. Now I've got the platform marked out, so I can see that I'm going to be ballasting in between the platforms here and at the other end up to the end of the loops. And on this side, obviously I've got a platform marking on this side. The question is, how far across do I go? I need some kind of a barrier along the back of the railway property. So what I'm going to be using for that is I've got some of these, which are Gaugemaster Great Western Spear Fencing. I've got 2 packs here, and I've just given them a quick spray in a black paint. They come actually in black plastic, so You don't really need to paint them, you can use them just as is. I've just given them a bit of a matte spray to take the plastic look off them. The slightly irritating thing about these is that you get in one pack, I think it's 3 whatever these are called, frets, but on each fret you've got one load with a single gate in and one load with a double gate in, and that's the same on all 3, so you're not going to be using that many gates in your fence, I wouldn't imagine. So it's a bit of a shame that there isn't 1 fret like this and then 2 that's just pure fencing, because I'm going to have to cut these gates out for most of the runs, and they're just going to be waste really. I've not really got anything to use them for, so it's a little bit annoying, but they are cheap enough and they look nice. I think they're going to be pretty good ones to get in. So I'm just going to cut these off the frets and drill little holes all the way down the back, and then stick these in and glue them into place, and then we'll be good for the ballast. So I've had a slight change of plan. So I found that trying to drill the holes in exactly the right places for every one of the fence posts to get those stuck in properly was very stressful and annoying. I wound up getting it very slightly out and then having to make a really big hole in the board, which I kind of want to avoid doing. So I've stopped doing that, and I'm basically just using a little super glue and chopping the extra bits of the legs off and just super gluing them straight onto the board. I figure if the glue's good enough to hold the point rodding down, it should be good enough to hold this down. So far, it's pretty decent. I think there's a bit of flex in it because it's plastic, but you're going to get that even if it's stuck through the board as well. And once I've got the ballast in and a bit of earth on the path side and soaked it all in PVA, I reckon that's going to be just as sturdy as if it had the legs all the way through. So I'm pretty comfortable with that. So I'll just carry on doing this, and once I get around here to behind the signal box, I'm going to be using one of the gates to have a gate through into the yard, access to the box there. So here we go, and let's just do a quick time lapse. Okay, so I'm now coming up to the edge of the board, and what we've got here is basically this full 2 packs of fencing, and what I've got left over a bunch of 6 double gates, which if ever I need any gates at any other point on the layout, I know where I'm going to use them from. I'm probably going to have one, or maybe it's only going to be a single gate. It's probably going to be a single gate at the end of the path here. I have now realised that I've sort of done this the wrong way around, in that I actually want the gap between the fencings to be bang on the edge of the board, so to make it easier to take the board away and together, by not having to cut the fence in the middle. So really I should have started at this end of the board and worked it away. The benefit of hindsight, I guess. So I'm just going to take a couple of these last panels and put them in here, and hopefully 2 of those should lead me nicely to the edge of the board. So possibly more by good luck than good judgment, I managed to get the end post here pretty much dead on the end of the board without having to fiddle around too much, and it's just nicely 1 double gate width from the edge of the shed, with just leaving just nicely enough clearance to get my widest loco through. So pretty happy with that. Right, so I've been round and touched up the paintwork on the facing sides of the platform just to blend it in a bit, and I've put the buildings into positions, the main ones that are going to be up against the ballast face. So now I'm good, hopefully, to ready and start the ballasting process. And the ballast I'm using is a Woodland Scenics one. It's a fine grey ballast. This is actually a bag that I bought for my first layout, Ddraig, and so I'm hoping that there should be enough ballast left in there to do at least the station area before I have to buy another bag. I'm going to be using the tried and tested old-fashioned method of pinching it between the thumb and forefinger. I'll be leaving gaps around the point works initially, and going and doing those separately, and I'll be using just this little brush just to tidy the edges up. But the good thing about it being within the station area is that there's platform edges on the outer sides of the ballasting area for a lot of it, so I can just push it up against that and use the brush to get it reasonably flat. So now I've had the first pass, I'm just going to go back in and cover up any barer patches, and I'm going to use my trusty tweezers to very carefully tweezer in the smallest amount of ballast I can get away with around the points, just to try and hide the baseboard. As I was round about at this point, I've just realised I need to put the buffers in at these three ends here. Unfortunately, it turns out from my last layout, I've only got two of these in stock. I think these are Pico ones. So what I'm going to do is, because I can see they're designed to be made out of sleepers, so I've got some of the sleepers from the old track on my last layout. I'm just going to cut these into shape, and I'm going to make one of these to go on the other end. Okay, so I've just got four old sleepers from the old track. Two of them I've cut to be about 2/3 of the length, and so then I'm going to glue the other two across the middle. And obviously I've got markings. I've cut the chairs off that held the old track in, so that tells me how wide, how far apart they need to be for the track. And I'm just going to bob a little bit of glue on, a little bit of glue on. So obviously these sleepers are designed to be on the track, glued down, stuck down onto the baseboard. So they are completely flat, so there's no detail in the back. So I'm just going to put some putty into these holes, and then just use a knife to scribe a little detailing onto there, just so that they're not completely flat. And I'll put it into position, and I'm very carefully brushing off the ballast off the top of every single sleeper. So this is a very time consuming and laborious process. Alright, whatever you do, if you're doing this, you just need to resist the temptation to just blow bits of errant ballast out of the way, because obviously you will just blow everything away. And yeah, that wouldn't be good. So I would expect outside the engine shed there to be a bit of a build-up of ash, soot, oil, things like that. It's going to be a rather darker colour down there. So what I've got here is actually a selection of ash that I've collected from the remnants of a barbecue, and I've just ground it up in pestle and mortar. This is one that's used purely for modelling, so it's separate from anything food. It's not used for that. I'm just going to sprinkle that down here around the engine shed, and I might even put a little bit around the points at the end of the platforms and down the end of the loops where the engines might stop for a while, just to add a little bit of extra colour and texture down there. So and this one's my tub of Welsh steam coal, so I'm just going to get some of the really fine stuff and just sprinkle a tiny bit of that down on by the engine shed as well, just for some extra. So I've gone around as best as I can, at any rate, and swept away the ballast from all the areas that I don't want the ballast to be ending up. So what I'm going to do now is wet all the ballast. So I've got a little spray bottle, just a cheap mister, and in that is some soapy water. So it's basically just water with a bit of washing up liquid. Some people use IPA mixed with water. It just needs something to get it wet, but it's going to loose, not going to have the surface tension, so that when you then add the glue, it's going to just soak into it rather than trying to ball it up. That's hopefully the plan, so I'm just going to go around and so there's a bit of advice. When you're spraying, start spraying high up so that it falls very gently but without disturbing the ballast, and then as it gets wet, slowly move it down until when it's quite wet you can then spray it pretty close to get it well soaked, but it's now not disturbing the ballast and moving. I think that's more than enough. So now I just need to come around and get the glue on. Normally the best way of doing it really, I think, is with a syringe to just squeeze it all in. I haven't got one of those, unfortunately. I discovered yesterday. I thought I did, but I don't, so I'm going to be just making that mix up in a little tub. Left over from a dessert, and I'm just going to be basically using a straw thumb over the end to squeeze it in that way. So the glue's all in now and drying, and I've learnt a couple of things to say. So the first is, if you're going to do something unrepeatable, make very sure the camera's recording before you start. More helpful advice, make sure that the PVA and water mix is really well and truly mixed in, because otherwise you might wind up with little specks of undiluted PVA in your ballast, which you really don't want. If you do find that you get specks of white, I find a little bit extra water to it, and then just tapping it with the end of the tweezers, managed to dissolve pretty quickly, no problems. So that's a good one. And another thing is, I am doing this today in a very hot room on a pretty warm day. So it might not necessarily be a problem other times, but I did discover that by the time I'd got everything wet with a mister spray and then got the glue in, the ballast was already starting to dry before I could get the glue down, so it's starting to ball up again. So much better way of doing it, rather than wetting everything first, is to go around with your glue in one hand and the wetting spray in the other one, and spray maybe 3 or 4 inches at a time, get it nice and wet, then get the glue in and then work down onto the next section. So that's essentially what I wound up having to do. Another thing is to make sure you've got some tissue paper, kitchen roll, something like that handy, just to mop up any excess glue or water liquid that you might have around. Oh, and another important thing is to be very careful with the glue liquid around the points. The last thing you want to do is get glue in the point blade mechanism and wind up gluing your points open one way or the other. Yeah, that would be really bad, so don't do that, which I definitely did not do that and then have to mop it up with a tissue. No, wouldn't do that. So I've got some strips of just plain plasticard, and I've just cut them along roughly by hand so they're not super straight, and I spray painted them grey. So I'm going to cut these into small tiny rectangles, and then these are going to be the front of the platform along the edge, and then for the main surface I've got in my pestle and mortar a bunch of genuine slate that's been well and truly bashed up and crushed into pretty much dust. So the plan is, I'm not sure whether to have this just as it is. I'll probably mix in, I've got some dark brown ballast, because this is a very dark grey. Just mix them together to give a bit of texture, a bit of colour. And whilst the wall filler is still a bit damp, it's not quite set yet, I'll then spread this across the top and pat it down flat. So hopefully that will then stick into the wall filler and just give a bit of surface texture to the platform. Okay, so my island platform is substantially complete now. The way I did that, as I said, with the wall filler in to build up to the height, and then I've used the ballast and slate mix on the top and the coping stones down the edge. Now that was very tricky to do. My initial thought was to just put these into the wet wall filler and hope that when they dry they would stick, but obviously no. As soon as I put them in they just ping off everywhere, and I tried using poly cement to put them in, that wouldn't hold. Putting glue on the bits of plasticard to hold those. The way I eventually wound up doing it was to do about 1 inch at a time or so. Just put some basic PVA glue down and leave it for 20-30 seconds to start to go a little tacky, and then that had enough hold to be able to put the bits of plasticard onto the top to hold it in place. It's a little bit rough and ready in places, but it's kind of the look I was going for. I didn't want it to be a really slick mainline platform. So I wasn't super happy with the method of construction of this platform. So I opted to do something a bit different for the near one, for platform 1. So what I've got is I've just got a bit of foam board, A3 sheets, cut it to size. I'm going to glue that in position to perform the bulk of the height, rather than using the wall filler that I used on this side that was very messy, time consuming and quite uneven. It's difficult to get an even height using the wall filler. So hopefully this is going to be a much more easy and sensible and better looking result. Okay, so I just smeared a load of PVA along the underside of the foam board and also along the bottom of the baseboard there. I'm just going to sneak it into position. I'm quite fortunate in that the platform here, it turns out, by good luck rather than by good design, is pretty much exactly the length of two A3 sheets. So I've got the A3 foam board and I only had to cut the width. The length was absolutely perfect. So that was a very happy coincidence. Now that's the foam board nicely dried in place, good and firm. I've just got two strips of white plasticard here, cut to size, that I'm going to form the ramps on each end of the platform. They're just white at the moment, but as soon as I put them in and glue them down, then I will paint them over in a matte black, because I don't want any white showing up in between the whatever covering I put on there. So that's in and dried now, and I'm just going to do the coping stones on the edge of the platform, do exactly the same as I did for these ones. So I've got my little box full of tiny squares of plasticard painted grey, and I'm just going to bob a little PVA along the edge of the platform, so a small amount at a time, and then if I can find my tweezers, just pick random squares and I'm just going to bob them onto the edge. Nice. Right, so I've got the edge coping stones all the way down to the end of the platform. Now they are a little bit uneven, which is pretty expected really. So the next thing I'm going to do is take a bit of the old sandpaper and just run it down, try and smooth off the edges a bit. What this will do is take off some of the grey primer paint on there, but that's absolutely fine. I'm going to be painting over it all, and I want it to be a little bit uneven with the paint. I don't want it to be just a smooth flat colour, so it's all going to work in. So another thing that this will do, in addition to smoothing out the edge, we'll also see if any of these are not glued down properly. Running this over it, they will easily pop off, and I can see that they then need to be re-glued. So far so good. Interestingly, when I did this down the island platform, loads of these came popping up because they hadn't glued down properly. So far, I've done much better on this side. They are all glued down good and solid. So, well done me on that front. One thing is, of course, this is generating a lot of dust and debris, which is also getting in across the track and that. So I've got a little mini hoover, so I will come and hoover all that dust up before I go any further. There we go, there's one that's come loose. Great, so that's looking a lot smoother now, a lot less uneven, fewer trip hazards for my little passengers. Now here I've just got some heavily watered down grey acrylic paint, so I'm just going to lightly brush this down the tiling in the edge, just to have a nice bit of a wash. And with it being very thin, it's going to dry a little bit uneven. So I'm just going to let that dry as it is, and then I'll put a second wash over before carrying on with the platform surface itself. Right, so that's nice and dry now. So last job for now is going to be putting the actual platform surface down. So when I did the island platform over here, what I did was I scattered my material on it and then sprayed the PVA mix over the top, exactly as I did for the ballast. And what I'm going to try on this one is slightly different. I've got my mix of watered down PVA glue and I've put a tiny drop of washing up liquid in that just to break the surface tension a bit. So I'm just going to paint this on. I may regret this plan, but this is my plan. So making sure I get right up to the edges of the coping stones and I've got a good cover across. If I'm not careful, my glue down this end is going to be drying before I've finished spreading glue down the other end. So what I'm going to do, I have just decided, because this on here is already drying, so I'm going to do it in sections. So again, it's my ballast mix. This one is again it's a Woodland Scenics fine dark brown that I'm using. And I'm just going to spread this over the top. Okay, looking good. So now I'm going to carry on to the next section. How long is so I guess I'm probably going to do this in 4 sections. It's going to take a little while to do it. It's basically the same as what you just saw. So I'm not going to bother filming it all, otherwise this video is going to be too long. So I'll just do that and then I'll come back to you once it's done. Okay, so the platform surface is all in there now. And I did just give it a quick spray over the top with some watered down PVA just to make sure the top surface was fully glued down and not just the bottom layer of it. And you can probably see on the camera some bits are drying quicker than others. I think that's a perfect place really to leave it. It's been far too long since the first video, so it's definitely time to get this video edited and uploaded. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. If you did, feel free to do comment, like, subscribe, all the usual jazz. And hopefully it won't be quite such a long wait until part 3, where I think I'll be looking at getting some buildings done. There's going to be a track down the back, and maybe I'll see about what's happening at this end of the layout as well. Just to keep you going until then, I'll end the video with just some shots of the first trains coming in out of my new platforms. So enjoy that, and thanks again for watching. Cheers!